Hello everyone, and welcome back to our lectures on the Exalted Treatise on the response of the Tao. Today we're going to look at this particular passage, and it's made up of 4 lines, 4 instructions of advice, and we'll start with sort of reading it out as a whole. So, to murder someone for profit, to depose someone to take their position, to kill those who have capitulated, and to banish the upright and demote the worthy. Now, these are 4 very clear examples of misdeeds that are bound to lead a person to suffer misfortune. If we start with the first one, it seems so obvious that, to murder someone is clearly unlawful in most places. But the words for profit sort of give us some clues as to why such misdeeds still happen. Everyone knows that it's wrong to kill somebody else, but why do these crimes happen? Well, it's because the other person has something to gain. Profit would indicate that there's some money involved, or maybe it could be some other sort of gain. And unfortunately, the person who, this, I suppose it's very clear that that's not the right way to go about cultivating those gains. And, you might probably be thinking about thieves and, breaking into somebody's property and taking their possessions and killing the people who happen to witness them, or the rightful owners of those possessions. But this particular passage in the Exalted Treatise is actually directed to people who are in positions of some sort of leadership or responsibility, where they're responsible for sort of the life and death of others. They make those key decisions. And to give you, there are 2 examples. One is traditionally government officials in the past. They would be the ones responsible for sentencing people to death. There was a capital punishment back in the days, and if they did so wrongfully, if they were motivated by some sort of self-interest, by wrongfully sentencing someone to death and confiscating their property, appropriating their land, etc., well, that would also fall into this particular category. Or if the government official took bribes and, imprisoned somebody, and knowing full well that they wouldn't survive custody, and take that opportunity to take away their property and their money, etc., that would also fall into this particular instruction. But besides government officials, if you think about it, doctors, medical malpractice, where the doctor treats, prescribes unnecessary or inappropriate treatment that really causes the patient's life to be on the line. And, if they in fact die, well, that is clearly a misdeed in the eyes of the Exalted Treatise. So these are just some examples, but you might be wondering, well, clearly it's unlawful. No one in their right mind would do something like this. What are the consequences? The consequences are that not only will the person lose their own life, they've taken the life of somebody else, they're bound to lose their own life, but they'll also lose all of the money that has been ill-gotten. And there's a particular example in the collected commentaries, and it refers to a boatman by the name of Gong Zhuan, who had a boat, was on the Yangtze River, ferrying a passenger. And it just so happened that they encountered gale force winds, very rough conditions, the waters, the waves, and the whole boat literally rocked, and it was extremely dangerous. Well, this boatman, Gong Zhuan, he took advantage of these conditions, these perilous conditions, and actually pushed the passenger on his boat into the waters, and the passenger died. And the passenger happened to be a very wealthy merchant. And so Mr. Gong made off with whatever property that was left behind, and just based on that became one of the wealthiest people at the time. He goes home, and his wife, not too long after, gives birth to their son, and all is well and good, but finds that as the son grows up, it's very strange. The son treats his own father as an enemy. Now, you can see that obviously relations were terrible, and he's upset, he's angry about this. How could parents do so much for their children? How could his own son treat him as an enemy? And so he looks for answers. And he, to such extent that he resorts to divination and what's known as planchette writing. And the person comes back with this short poem to help him think, reflect on himself. Basically, wild westerly winds in the 8th month that year. What you did amid the Yangtze waves. One errant thought 20 years ago. Search your conscience and you will know. So he's asking, how could my own son do this to me? How could he treat me like this? Asking for answers. Why? And he's sort of shocked that the spirits, in heavens, know what he did that day. And he's shocked, he's stunned, and it's recorded that he leaves his family, the house, and actually lives in fear of his life for the rest of his life. He's well aware of what happened to his passenger, and he was worried that the same thing might happen to him. He might lose his life. And so he lives in fear basically for the rest of his life, and dies a terrible death later on. So clearly we can see how he has suffered. He loses his life. The quality of life will, clearly not very good, and all the money that clearly didn't help in any way. So this is just one vivid example of the consequences, the sort of misfortune that can happen when a person murders somebody for profit of some sort. Now, the second part of this line, about deposing someone to take their position. What does that mean? That means to have someone dismissed from their job or demoted, but for whatever reason, just out of the way, so that the person who's scheming a lot be able to take over their position, basically. So they put themselves as number one. They're only looking out for themselves, and they don't care about anybody else. Clearly, this also counts as a serious misdeed. And this is sort of vividly shown in the next historical account. Now, these are all, anecdotes from history. So sort of relates to the Commissioner of Military Affairs at the time, Cao Bin, and he lived in the 10th century, and he had a very prestigious position. And he contributed meritorious service. So he was highly regarded by everyone at court. And one of his colleagues, Mi Dechao, actually didn't feel too good about this and sort of thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could have that role? When would I get the chance to rise to that position? And so he makes up some charges and basically frames Cao Bin and hasn't dismissed ultimately. So he's out of the way. And no surprise, Mi Dechao actually is promoted and takes over the role of being Commissioner of Military Affairs. Now, it's recorded that not too long after, other members of the court, they realize what has happened, and they, petition the emperor, and who realizes also, and they end up, being able to reinstate Cao Bin. So he returns to the court, well regarded as before. In fact, awarded honorary title of the Lord of Law, which is the state where Confucius comes from. And so, his decorated, very accomplished career continues. And it's recorded that his granddaughter ends up being married to one of the later emperors of the Song dynasty, and she becomes empress. So we can see that he's almost unscathed by the sort of troubles. Him and his family members continue to rise and prosper. What happens to Mi Dechao other than having people finding out what he had done? Well, he ends up being banished. So not only was he not only did he lose his job, but he was sort of expelled out of the state. So he's very clearly worse off. His whole plan backfires, and he's worse off than before. Now, it's important that if you think about it, the person who has worked so hard to cultivate the good deeds, the good causes, to be appointed as a certain high officer or official, and this was a privilege to be able to serve society, to make that positive contribution to the government, to the state, to the people. And a person who has cultivated such good deeds, well, they're guaranteed by the law of cause and effect, they're guaranteed to enjoy the fruits of the harvest, or the labours, the good fortune in store for them. And no one else can sort of snatch that away. So we can see that with Cao Bin, he's able to be reinstated to the same role as before, and he went on to even greater things and continue his prosperous career. But what happens when to the person who tries to attain the same role by improper means, through misconduct? Well, Mi Dechao was briefly able to be in that position. That was the reality. But we can see that it was not very long. The fact that he was able to be in that position at all means that he must have cultivated some good deeds in the past, could have been in past lifetime, to be able to attain that status. But because of his misdeeds in getting there, he had cultivated it sort of sowed the seeds for misfortune. And so the misfortune of being banished was clearly just around the corner. He had discounted his own, good fortune by committing the misdeeds. And so this sort of shows us that, well, if we cultivated the good causes, we're bound to enjoy the good fortunes. But it's like if you haven't cultivated the good causes, you try to commit these misdeeds to get to where you want to be. It's just as good as sowing melon seeds and hoping to grow apples. It just doesn't work. If there are apples that sprout out from the ground, it means that maybe a long time before you did actually plant some apple seeds somewhere, but that doesn't normally work. Trying to get these positions or the sort of profit by violent means, killing somebody, taking away their role, taking away their position, is not the right way to go. Okay. Now, the next part of this passage refers to an offence that usually happens in the context of wartime, conflict, where one side capitulates, they surrender, so they stop fighting, they put down their weapons, they're no longer a threat, but their opponents take their lives anyway. So that is a misdeed. And what happens? What are the consequences of this sort of misdeed? Well, clearly causing death to anybody is already, not a good thing to do. But to kill someone who's completely defenseless, it's like killing innocent civilians. That makes it all the more serious an offence. And so in the collected commentaries on the Exalted Treatise, it states that, those who kill people who have surrendered, who have capitulated, well, they're bound to suffer a terrible death themselves and lifetimes of misfortune because of the magnitude, how serious it is. Usually, in times of war, it's more than, it's not a one-to-one combat. There's a whole group of people who've capitulated, and by taking their lives, you can understand why it would amount to lifetimes of misfortune. And there's a positive example in the collected commentaries. Let me just stop sharing for a second. And it relates to an official by the name of Lien Xixie, and he lived in around the 13th century. He actually served the founding emperor of the Yuan dynasty in China's imperial history. What he did was very special. Not only did he take care to avoid this misconduct of killing people who had already surrendered or capitulated, but being a high official, he was able to pass, sort of put in place some regulations or rules so that this sort of thing didn't happen. And he even went one step further. He said these regulations were recorded to protect captured prisoners of war, in that anyone who assaulted them, who tried to kill them, or harm them in any way, well, they would be, that would count as intentionally assaulting a civilian. So he made it clear that these were criminal offences and serious offences. And in fact, those who had surrendered, who were captive, prisoners of war, if they were ill, if they were injured in any way, then he had, them looked after by civilians, so nursed back to health. And it's recorded that, having that insight to know that you don't take advantage of people who've already surrendered. They're no longer a threat to anyone. And putting those sorts of regulations in place. It's recorded that his brothers, and he had 6 sons, they all rose to successful, prominent status within the community. So he knew what the right thing was. He ensured that other people also followed this by putting regulations in place. And we can see that, well, actually, his family, so clearly more than just him personally, his whole family benefited from his good deeds. So this was just one example of a person being able to do the right thing. Now, if I go back to the PowerPoint, the other part of this passage, banish the upright and demote the worthy. There's sort of 2 parts to this. Banish is sort of sending someone, expelling them from the state, exiling them, and demoting is ensuring that they lose their position. Could even mean dismissing them from the court altogether. But the sort of the subject of this, the upright, these are people who are honest, who are principled. The worthy means that they have some sort of talented ability or skill. These are exactly the right sorts of people to make a positive contribution to society, right? Not only do they have that skill and ability, but they're also the right sort of people. You can trust them, you can depend on them. So these are exactly the sort of people that you would want to recruit. And yet they can sometimes be banished or demoted. And the Exalted Treatise makes it clear that by banishing the upright, demoting the unworthy, it is a misdeed. And we can sort of understand that because these people have the ability to make a positive contribution. They should be given, appropriate positions to do so, or for the sake of society. And when you stand in their way, prevent that from happening, clearly a lot of people will suffer as a consequence. The community as a whole will be poorer as a result of this. So that's why it would be a misdeed. Now, there's an interesting example from the Spring and Autumn Annals of Master Yan. And we sort of, through this particular anecdote, Master Yan offers some advice to Lord Zin, one of the rulers that he serves through his long, distinguished service. We sort of understand how prized these people, the upright, the worthy, were. As the anecdote reads, Lord Zing was out hunting, and he goes up the mountain, he sees a tiger, he goes down to the marshes and is hunting, and he sees a snake. And when he turns home, he's worried about such sightings, and he sort of seeks advice from Master Yan. He said, today I went out hunting, I saw a tiger in the mountains, I saw a snake in the marshes. I'm afraid that these are what are called inauspicious omens. It doesn't mean bad luck for me or, my state. So he seeks advice from his high official. And Master Yan, who's very knowledgeable, very wise, he explains to the king that, well, there are inauspicious things in this country. There are 3. But snakes and tigers are not included in these 3 things. So what are the 3 inauspicious things? He said, well, to have a wise person in your state without discovering them, without knowing about them, well, that's the first inauspicious thing. If you think about it, if you have someone who can contribute a lot, they have good talent, or very wise, as it states, but the state doesn't know about it, well, how can they be able to be recruited to the court to serve the people? So that's why it's bad luck. then to know of their presence and then not employ them, that is the second inauspicious thing. Well, you already know them, so why aren't you making use of them? Seems such a shame, for it causes detriment to the whole country. So that's why it would be, and also bad luck. Now, to employ them without giving them your trust as the ruler, well, that is the third inauspicious thing. So it's sort of, you've now recruited them, they've got a role, but they seem to not be able to do anything because you're constantly looking over their shoulder, double checking everything that they do. They're just not able to accomplish anything, really. So they might as well not be there. And that is why that would also be bad luck. These are the only things that can be called inauspicious. In the eyes of Master Yen, saying it all revolves around these wise people, the upright, the worthy. Today, you went up the mountain and saw a tiger. Well, that's where tigers live, right? You went down to the marshes. You saw a snake. That's also where snakes happen to live. These are their natural habitats. If you go to these places, you see these creatures. How could it be inauspicious? So Master Yen is saying to Lord Xing, look, let's not be superstitious. If you want to know about inauspicious things, what will really cause your country, your state, bad luck, or here are three. There's no need to worry about tigers and snakes. Focus on these three things. So it sort of helps us understand that, how prized these people are, the sort of human resources. They're the real assets of the state. Now, in the next example, it relates to an individual from the Tang Dynasty by the name of Yan Zhenqing, and he is a renowned calligrapher, eminent calligrapher, also an eminent statesman and military general and governor. And he had this propensity to be very direct, was honest and loyal, and because of this sort of personality, he called attention to corruption in high places. So clearly he didn't, that's not conducive to making friends with everybody at court. Now, but he was held in very much high respect by everyone. But unfortunately, the Grand Chancellor, this is the highest official in the land, Luo Qi, he had no tolerance for this sort of outspokenness. So, he almost has a bit of a grudge with Yan Zhenqing. And later on, when a particular military commissioner rebels, well, Luo Qi, he immediately recommends that Yan Zhenqing be posted out to negotiate with this rebel military commissioner. He's sort of rebelling, wants to be the emperor himself. A very dangerous assignment, and could be life-threatening even. But that was unfortunately how Luo Qi happened to play it. The emperor thought, well, of course, Yan Zhenqing is just the right person. He's experienced, he's loyal to the state. We can completely trust that he will do the right thing and bring matters back on track. And so Yan Zhenqing is posted out. As soon as he gets there, he's taken captive by this rebel military commissioner. And, he's sort of threatened and also coaxed to surrender, to join forces with the other side, to serve as the advisor, as an official for that rebel military commissioner. But of course, Yan Sing would never do that. And unfortunately, with that, things drag out, and but he dies the following year. So he's sent to negotiate, becomes held captive, and is ultimately killed by that rebel military commissioner. And the emperor, when that finds out, he suspends court for 5 days in mourning for this a martyr, you could say, who died for the state. And he ordered for the court to compile a record of all of Yan Sing's achievements. Yan Sing was granted posthumous honours. He was given the title of Minister of Education, and an epithet of being cultured and loyal. That sort of was specifically designated his contribution, his sort of meritorious service to the state and the person that he was. So, Yan Sing seemed that his whole life was destroyed because of what Luo Qi had done, but he was able to enjoy these posthumous honours, and ever since people have held him and continue to hold him in high regard. What happened to Luo Qi? Well, he was condemned. It was found out he was accused of fraudulent conduct, of destroying the loyal and good officials at court, to the detriment of the state. And as a result, he was condemned and banished. And he happened to die in the same year, 785. So, he had his own way of banishing the upright, demoting the worthy, and he got his own comeuppance. Why would people do that? You might think, why would people bother to do that? Why not, cultivate themselves, get that training, education, moral education to earn that role? Why destroy people, such great people in those positions, destroy their careers? Well, sometimes it could be because they're worried about, like Luo Qi. He was the highest official in the land, and he wanted to maintain that position. It was about protecting and maintaining their own role. Sometimes colleagues could be jealous of someone's strengths and abilities and talents. And sometimes it's purely because of discrimination. They're not, a member of the same clique or faction at court, and therefore, not a member of our team. Now, these are just some of the reasons for such misconduct, but they're certainly not excuses. And when we look at all of these passages that we've covered today, to take someone's life for their, to try to earn some sort of profit, to take over their position and destroy their career in particular, it really doesn't work out. That is not the right way of trying to earn profits, to advance in anyone's career. And why it doesn't work out is explained in the Exalted Treatise. They all fall into the class of ill-gotten gains. Okay? And by taking ill-gotten gains in any sort of form, it's likened to satisfying our hunger with poisoned meat, or trying to quench our thirst with poisoned wine. Not only is there no temporary satisfaction, but death also becomes imminent. So you think that by killing that person, you'll be able to enjoy their riches. Well, like the boatman, he lived in fear for his life, for the rest of his life, and ultimately died a terrible death. It doesn't work out. And this is sort of towards the end of the Exalted Treatise, makes it clear that all of these misdeeds listed above, well, by doing those sorts of things, you think you might be profiting, gaining some advantage in the short term. Maybe they're not even advantages at all. Well, the reference to wartime, killing people who've already surrendered, it makes me sort of reminds us that warfare is a disaster for everyone involved. And for so many reasons, the main reason being the terrible loss of life. As armaments and strategies become ever more developed over time, the loss of life that happens, that is inevitable when countries, states go to war, becomes all the more tragic and devastating and destructive. So it reminded me of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization and what they wrote in their constitution. They adopted this constitution. It came into being just days after the end of the Second World War. So it was about the 16th of November 1945. And the governments at the time sort of signed up to this constitution that explains in its sort of opening page, recognizes that wars begin in the minds of men and women. And it is precisely there, in the minds of men and women, that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And the beauty of reading the Exalted Treatise or texts like the Exalted Treatise, like the Deeds of the Way that you will all be familiar with, is because it equips us with a mental toolkit to be able to check our thoughts, check our responses in our interpersonal interactions. This is on a moment-to-moment, on a day-to-day basis, something that we can really do. And it's in that way that we can do better to improve our relationships with all the people around us, and ultimately, contribute to this intellectual and moral solidarity of humanity. And that is the best form of protection, the best form of prevention of another world war. So I think that's really illustrates. These texts seem to be quite short. That we take a passage, short passage every week, and it seems to take us a long time to get through them. But at the end of the day, they're short, they're very concise, and they really help us reflect on ourselves and how we can do things better. And the question to ask is, how can I serve better the people in my life, the people around me? As I say, you think global, act local. And I want to leave you with 3 really inspirational examples that have been passed down since the earliest times of China's history. And they're inspirational because they are related to 3 individuals who have reflected on their thoughts, who have made a change. And it's brought benefit to not just themselves, but all the people around them. The first individual is the founding ruler of the Shang dynasty. His name was King Tang. These are the dates here. You can see he lived a very long time ago. During his reign, a particular plant grew up in the courtyard, and it was very strange. It grew up very fast. sprouted at dusk, and by dawn the following day, it was as big. It's like you could put your arms around it, the trunk or the root of it. So this was very abnormal, and the king's officers requested that they consult the divination to find out why this has come into being. Because in those days, people would look to developments in the natural environment as symptoms of, whether human beings were interacting in the right way within the world, and especially given that this plant happened to grow in the courtyard, it was considered, could have been ominous for the rulership, the king, his government. Was there something that they had done wrong? It's a bit like for us today, maybe the loss of biodiversity and abnormal weather patterns really being symptoms of how human beings maybe could do better in their interactions with the natural world. So in those days, people paid attention to these sorts of abnormal developments. And so they did. They consulted a diviner, and this is what they said. I've heard that auspicious signs, sort of very fortunate, lucky signs, precede good fortune. So have this sort of, preview of good fortune. But if on seeing such signs, one commits these misdeeds, then no good fortune will come of them. Inauspicious signs precede disasters. But if upon seeing such signs one performs good deeds, then maybe disaster will not come about. So when King Tang heard this, what did he do about it? Well, he went to court early, he retired late, so he worked very hard. He inquired after the sick, commiserated with the mourners, pardoned the crimes, and gave alms to the poor. So he literally cared for the most vulnerable, the people who were ill, the people who had suffered illness, loss within their family, the people suffering injustice. Maybe they were wrongly accused, falsely imprisoned, and those suffering poverty. He worked very hard, and he paid particular attention to those who were the vulnerable, the disadvantaged in society. And it's also recorded that he protected and tended to the lives of the 100 clans. And the 100 clans is a reference to the officials, so all of his court. He really looked into caring for them, because in doing so, they would help them look after the rest of the people. The king is obviously a very important person, but he can't sort of govern alone. He needs all of his officials, his whole court, behind him. By looking after the court, they're in a better position to look after the rest of the people and sort of set a really great example. Well, what happened when he did this? After 3 days, the plant disappeared. So we can sort of see that King Tang didn't try to blame anyone else. Was it the gardener's fault? Or he didn't try to destroy the plant. He reflected on himself, and he tried to do his duty to the best that he could, and brought about change in a matter of days. I think that's really, it gives us hope. And, the story is so old, but even today, still being translated, still being read and studied. And we might think, well, maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe these plants that grow up really quickly, they don't last very long. Maybe it's a complete coincidence. Well, we can have a look at the next story. It comes from a very different period of time in history. The Zhou dynasty followed the Shang dynasty, and King Wen was one of the founding, you could say, the earliest rulers of the Zhou dynasty. It happened to be the longest dynasties in imperial China. So it lasted for about 800 years. Now, it's said that while King Wen ruled, in the 8th year of his reign, he was bedridden with illness, so it must have been a very serious illness. After 5 days of him being sick in bed, obviously not able to attend court, there was an earthquake. Epicenter of that earthquake was sort of in the capital, where the court was, where he lived, the king lived, and fortunately didn't go beyond that. But this worried all of his court, all of his officers, and they thought, well, we've heard that earthquakes happen because of what the ruler's done. Your Majesty has been in bed because of illness, and now there's been an earthquake. We need you to do something to avoid this happening ever again. This is terrible. And King Wen took this on board and said, well, what do you suggest I do? What can I do to avoid such natural disasters? Well, they said, maybe initiate projects, build something, encourage the people to enlarge the city walls. Surely, maybe this will avert disaster, prevent more earthquakes happening in the past. Maybe this time it's clearly targeted around the capital area. If we enlarge the capital, maybe that might diffuse the impact. Maybe it might not happen again. Well, the King Wen said, no, that's not right. Heaven exhibits inauspicious signs when it intends to punish the guilty. I must be guilty of something, and that's why heaven has done this, to punish me. And if I go to, make the people, cause more labor for the people, more costs, etc., to enlarge the city walls, have more building projects, that would make things worse for the people and, multiply my guilt. He refuses to do that. Well, they said, well, maybe you can change what you're doing. Maybe accumulate more good deeds, multiply your good deeds to try to avert such disasters. Earthquakes are a terrible, serious natural disaster. So they suggested this, and King Wen takes this on board, and he does so. Now, what he does is different to what King Tang did back in the Shang dynasty. Bearing in mind that he's sort of bedridden with illness, but he's able to recognize and reward the worthy and wise. So, and this was in relation to, in accordance with the ritual protocol. So he gave gifts to the feudal lords. These were sort of individuals who were responsible for sort of other jurisdictions within the empire. He ensured that, they were, you could imagine, sort of interstate relations were good. He ensured that he gave gifts of jade and silk to the most eminent scholar officials, also in accordance with protocol, and, promulgated titles, distinctions among the various ranks of the officers. He had fields measured out and as rewards for those with meritorious service. And, he did this with his court ministers. And after doing that, the king's illness was cured. So he felt better, completely recovered not too long after. Now, the earthquake, if you remember, happened during the 8th year of his reign. After that, he ruled for another 43 years. And he ruled for a total of 51 years by the time he had passed away. And he was able to stop further earthquakes and prevent other inauspicious signs from just by doing. He benefited himself, so he recovered from his illness, but the rest of the state, the rest of his country, was able to be at peace for decades. And if you think back to what Catherine was saying in the last passage last week, so important to recognize the worthy and the wise, because it means that everyone else is able to learn from their examples. You're sort of upholding them as the positive role models, and it has a very much an educative impact on the moral learning and practice of everyone else in that state. So we can understand the magnitude of these good deeds. So King Win reflected on himself. He made changes in his own way, and he wasn't long before he felt better, recovered from his illness. Just like with King Tang, took 3 days, matter of days before the plant went away. But more than that, in this example from King Wen, we know that it brought about, sort of long-standing peace and averted disaster for the rest of the rulership. So it sort of gives us a clue as to the fact that he continued in those ways. Now, the final historical example, relates to Lord Jing of the state of Song, and it's sort of towards the later part of the Zhou dynasty, period known as the Spring and Autumn period, and this was also around the same time as when Confucius was alive. Now, at the time, people would not just look at changes in the natural world, but they would also look up to the stars in the sky, and sort of movements in the constellations and the planets and the stars would be regularly checked for also for signs as a gauge of whether the people on the ground were being governed in the right way. So there'd be particular officials with that job of reviewing and observing the night skies. Now, in this particular account, the planet Mars has been observed to move into a position that corresponds with the state of Song. And so Lord Jing is worried about this. And he summons Prince Wei, who's a bit of an expert, and tries to consult him as to what do we do? What does this mean? Prince Wei replied, Mars is heaven's executioner. We know it is the red planet. And this particular location corresponds to the state of Song. And so some catastrophe awaits your lordship. It's not good at all. Not good news. Nonetheless, he tries to think of possible ways to shift the blame. And he suggests maybe shifting the blame to the intendant minister. And this is the minister that's sort of the highest minister, overseeing the rest of the court officials. Literally, you could think of the minister being the deputy to the Lord. And the Lord replies, no, can't do that. I've entrusted the governing of the state to this individual. They're very important. If by shifting the blame I bring about his death, that would be unlucky. So we can't do that. Well, the prince tries to think of other ways. Well, maybe we can shift this misfortune onto the people, try to diffuse the misfortune, not just one individual, but having a lot of people suffer. Maybe that would work. But the Lord replied, well, I'm supposed to be their Lord. The people die. I'll have no population. I'll have no state. It's better that I die alone. And then the prince is very resourceful. He tries to think of another way. Maybe shift it into the harvest and not have any lives lost. Maybe just losing the harvest is okay. But the Lord replies, if the harvest is harmed, there's not enough food, people will suffer famine, and they'll certainly die of starvation. I can't do that. If I murder my own people to assure my own survival, who will consider me a real lord? The role I'm supposed to be looking after everyone. But he resigns himself to his own fate. And this means that if my lifespan has come to an end, well, so be it. Don't need to tell anyone else. And he's prepared to face the consequences himself. Well, the prince, he sort of turns to go, and then he pays his respects, and he realizes, he congratulates Lord Tsing. Says, though heaven is high above, actually listens to those below. Your lordship has said 3 things of great virtue, and as a result, heaven is certain to reward your lordship 3 times. So he thinks that this very night, Mars will move through 3 constellations, and your lordship's lifetime will be extended by 21 years. And the Lord is responding, how do you know that? Only seconds before you were telling me that it was ominous and could be great catastrophe in store for myself, and could harm the harvest, the people, etc. So what are you saying? How do you know this will happen? Well, the prince explains. He says, if you say 3 good things, then you'll be rewarded 3 times. So that Mars will move through those 3 constellations, and each constellation is made up of 7 stars. Each star corresponds to 1 year of time. So 3 times 7 makes 21. That's why he predicts that Lord Tsing's life will be extended by 21 years. And actually, on that night, that is exactly what happens. So it sort of reminds me of another part of the Exalted Treatise. It's towards the end of the Exalted Treatise. You're probably thinking, well, Lord Tsing has just had this conversation with the prince. He hasn't done anything. It's not like King Tang or King Wen in the 2 examples before. How did it bring about this movement in the planets? Well, the Exalted Treatise explains that the person who gives rise to one thought of goodness, a kind thought, well, the heavens will already know. They'll be accompanied by spirits of good fortune, even though they've yet to put that thought into action. So they're supported and blessed. And a person who repents, refrains from further wrongdoings, and commits themselves to good deeds, well, if they continue to do that, they will be able to turn around misfortunes, transform misfortune into good fortune, which is sort of how transforming this ominous planetary movement into good fortune. And therefore, a fortunate person is virtuous in both word and thought and deed. Every little bit counts, even your thoughts. And by practicing these every day, being virtuous in word and thought and deed, well, heaven will bless such a person with good fortune in 3 years. It's sort of bound to happen. And we've seen results within 3 years, in a matter of days. etc. in just those 3 examples. So I want to leave you on that note that every little thought counts, and hopefully this helps us understand a little bit better these 4 sentences that make up this passage today. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.